everybody. We're going to get started. Light is blinding. I'm Rebecca Gilsdorf. I'm with the World Bank, and I've been asked to chair this session. So first, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our hosts here at AfricaSan, and also to the two people who helped organize this session, who will be our first presenters. So you'll hear more about them in just a moment. Just how this session is basically going to run, we're going to have two presentations to start off with that will each be about 15 minutes. And then we'll have another 15 minutes or so for Q&A. And the second half of the session, we're going to have a panel of people up to talk, and we'll have Q&A for that as well. And so as you know, since you chose to come here, we'll be talking about PPPs for sanitation. I think the title technically said for non-sewered sanitation, but we are thinking more broadly than that. We're thinking about ways for public and private sector to engage around the sanitation challenges that we see. Many of the examples we'll be talking about are non-sewered, but we're open to discussing all approaches. So the first presentation, as you see here, if you'd like to come up, Mwanza. So Mwanza Nachula Mukuka will be presenting. She has over 6 years experience in the sector as an environmental engineer, working on designing and implementing water and sanitation programs, particularly in non-sewered areas. And she currently works with Lusaka Water and Lusaka Water and Sewerage Company Limited as part of the Lusaka Sanitation Program. So thank you, Mwanza.
As Rebecca has introduced me, I'm from Lusaka Water and Storage Company. I'm currently working on the Lusaka Sanitation Program, which is a program funded by the World Bank, the AFDB, EIB, and KfW. Under the Lusaka Sanitation Program, I'm managing one particular component, which is a non-sewered sanitation component, which we refer to as Component 2. What we're trying to discuss today is one of the many activities we have under the LSP, and one thing that we're trying to just discuss with you is how we are trying to address the market challenges that we have in order for us to improve and restructure the sanitation service provision in terms of non-sewered sanitation. That basically is my outline of the presentation. We'll just briefly give you a context of Lusaka and then the journey that the utility has undertaken to be where we are today, and then talk about the market insights, the business plan, and then give a conclusion. This is the context of Lusaka. Lusaka is a city in the southern part of Africa. It's a capital city, and Lusaka Water is mandated to provide water and sanitation services. This map basically shows you what type of facilities that we have based on a rapid assessment that we conducted in 2016. And as you clearly see, more than half of the population is actually relies on on-site sanitation. In terms of the sheet flow diagram, which I think most of us clearly understand, you will see that we have about 17% of the sludge that is generated in the city that is safely treated, and the remaining 83% is not safely treated. This is some of the reason what prompted the utility to actually say what innovative mechanisms can we have, because we have a mandate to provide a service to the people. What we have there is just a journey of what Lusaka Water has taken. So in 2010, we developed a sanitation master plan that is in line with the national policy strategies that we have. And then in 2017, after we received funding from the IFIs, we developed a strategy. We didn't want to rush into implementing the project, but we thought we needed to come up with a strategy on how the utility should operationalize the on-site sanitation component post the project. And then from there, what we realized in terms of FSM business, we realized that we had insights, what we put up in our strategy, but then we needed to understand what really happens in the markets. And so we conducted quite an intensive market assessment on the private sector and also the landscape of FSM in Lusaka. From there, then we are moving to launch the FSM services as Lusaka Water. I have narrowed down the insights that we have for the purposes of this presentation to just basically look at what is it that we understood from the market assessment that we conducted. So we know that the market is segmented in two. We have the private operators that are using vacuum tankers servicing domestic and commercial customers. And then we also have the pit emptying market. We also tried to get insights on the treatment bits, which is both the septage and pit latrine wastage, and then we looked at the reuse end of bits. Yeah. So what did we learn from the insights in terms of the vacuum tankers? So we know the numbers that we have of the vacuum tankers in the city. We also know the companies that's developed. But also one thing, we also understand how much is it that they empty. And then we also looked at what is the utilization rate of these vacuum tankers that we have. This was important for us to actually just understand, and as we develop the partnership arrangements as well as the business model, we needed to understand the segments and also look at the numbers, which is very important, especially if you're going to venture into a PPP. We needed to also understand just the potential value of what we have in terms of domestic and industrial market, and then also just the typical pricing of a septic tank. Then from there, we also moved to looking at the pit emptying service, which is the majority of what we have in the city. What we learned is the fact that from experience, we had a project of FSM in 2 low-income areas where we formalized the existing private operators to work with a utility through a delegated service management. And then from this, we learned one aspect, which is, yes, we had a formalized service, but majority of these pit latrines are emptied by the informal pit emptiers. For one reason, apart from the market access, we conducted a detailed research on understanding what really aspires households to pay for a service. One thing that we found out from a formative research is the fact that apart from the households' issues of them not affording to empty a facility, it's also issues of how the service is provided. They want their pits to be emptied. They want it to be done right there and then, because it's also a behavior issue on how they understand when they need to empty their pit latrine or when they actually require that service. So from this, we also needed to know, what we realized is the fact that we have majority of these pit latrines that are emptied by the informal emptiers, about 41% from the data that we collected. And so we needed to also understand that as much as we have the private operators that are working, the informal pit emptiers as well, we needed to understand that there's limited capacity for both the formal and informal sector to actually grow this business. It's a day-to-day business from their side, but we needed to expand it to look beyond it being a day-to-day business. I think this is something that we've been alluded to, and we've been listening about the sanitation unicorn. And I think from perspectives of each and every person that is working sanitation, I think we want to get to the end of the chain as well as before providing the service. Yeah. So from these insights that we had, we came up with what we are calling the partnership arrangements that we thought could actually respond to the failures that we identified in the market. So what you see put up there is how Lusaka Water's partnership model has developed a partnership model which we actually hope to operationalize in the coming months. So you'll see that there are 2 market segments that we've separated, because we understand that from the research, we understand that the pit emptying market is more or less organized. But then we're still not sitting back as a utility. What we're trying to say is we're putting up conditions so that we can give them permits to actually operate in this line of business. One thing that we put up of concern is the fact that we understand from the analysis that the pit emptying market requires incentives and requires maturity to actually operationalize and also provide a professional service. And so if you see, we have, sorry. Yeah. And so if you see, we try to, sorry, I just need to get back. Sorry. Yeah. Technology, just need to head back to give up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think I'll just continue. So I think what we have done in the service model is the fact that we've tried to segment the markets, both the septic tank as well as the pit emptying market, and then focus more on the pit emptying market, which was the majority of what we needed to focus on. In this market also, what we learned is the fact that we had a cholera incident in 2018 and 2017 going into 2018, where we actually saw households contribute about $15, and the rest of the cost was subsidized by the government. And so we also got an insight on what really could be affordable, because as we are talking about a service, we need to think about the willingness to pay, and then we know that we are saving poor communities. And so from the information and the analysis that we have, we know that the pit emptiers, like we were saying, the informal pit emptiers actually offer, their pricing is lower than the formalized service, and even sometimes in terms of the private operators. And so what we are proposing is we needed to, if we're going to have a market that will mature, we need to, in a way, top up to support the emptying and transport business. And so in us developing this model, we're trying to ensure that we develop models around us supporting the private operators or the community-based enterprises that are in this service with a certain top-up. That then allows the market to mature for a certain period, and also not forgetting the fact that, in a way, we need to find a way in which to sustain this business. We can't talk about operationalizing a service model without the institutional aspects of it. Like I earlier said, Lusaka Water is only venturing into providing a service to the low-income areas in this process. But then we needed to also understand what institutional arrangements do we have for us to actually operationalize the service model. So what we're trying to do is we have identified that we have existing positions in the utility that we can utilize, but then also for us to operationalize what we've developed, we will require to have new staff that will solely dedicate to operationalizing this service model. So what this structure just gives us a proposed unit that we want to undertake in order for us to implement the service model that has been developed. We're also mindful of the fact that this is a process that we have to go to, and yes, as much as our dreams are very ambitious into getting to fully servicing the city, we're also mindful of the fact that we need to learn and transition into us being a fully serviced provider. In terms of operation and financial targets, what we came up with and what we found from the analysis is a fact, and which I've earlier alluded to, the fact that this market is not fully matured, and the capacity of the private operators will need to be built in terms of both financing and operational arrangements. And so one way in which we are looking to operationalize, apart from the transitional subsidy we have under the project, is we're looking to engage the regulator for us to we have developed through the business model that we have, we know we need a certain percentage of about 10% on the water tariff for us to sustain the O and aim of this business. And so if you can see the graph the graphs that I've presented kind of just gives us how much each component is contributing for us to actually have a functional FSM business. And then below we have the tariff of how much percentage is required on the water bills to implement the FSM business model. Because apart from us being a water utility, and we have clients and customers that we are servicing, there are those that we are not servicing. So we try to look around how best can we engage the regulator, because they have the mandate to actually regulate our tariffs. And so the way forward is what we're trying to discuss now is how can we present a business case to NOASCO that is very realistic for us to operationalize this business. One thing that is very interesting is the fact that if you see that if this is implemented, right now we have about only 900 cubic meters of sludge that is safely collected, if you refer back to the sheet flow diagram. But once we operationalize this, we are looking to actually empty about almost over 40,000 meter cubed of sludge in a year, which I think as a utility and from the perspective of a utility, we are able to provide a service that we are required to do. So in conclusion, what is it that we've learned for us to actually, as your takeaways? We are saying we need to design market intervention to address our market-specific failures. There are opportunities that we have actually realized, and there are failures, and what is why we design our service model based on the failures that we identified. There are many lessons that we've drawn, and I think what we're trying to say is the fact that I think every city, every utility is unique, and it's important as we operationalize or develop service models These are models that are based on the failures and the opportunities that a particular city has. We're also saying we need to engage the private sector. I think we cannot run away from the fact that they have a business mind. And usually as utilities, our mind is to provide a service. And I think it's only right to say that it's not that the utility has to provide all the services, but we can enter into good relationships with private operators that have the experience and they have mandate, and for us to still provide an efficient service. We cannot overemphasize the fact that stakeholder engagement and consultation is key in this whole process. Like I said, Lusaka Water is regulated by NWASCO. We also have an environmental regulator. We have the local authority. We have other players that are key for us to enable us deliver the service model. And so we've had a lot of engagements with the other stakeholders in order for us to align the activities we are carrying out and to ensure that we are all moving in the same pace to deliver one service. Apart from that, we are also saying we need to ensure an overall vision. Like I said, all the utilities, we also had a very ambitious plan, if you look in our strategy, to actually just say we need to provide for the all service. But I think it's important that we need to transition, learn our lessons, grow from the lessons, build up on our lessons for us to actually provide a fully fledged service, which most importantly has to be efficient and has to be of a high quality standard. So, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. There we go. Thank you, Monza. Since we got a slightly late start, I'm going to ask people to hold their questions until after the next presentation, if that's all right. So if we could give Monza another round of applause for that great presentation. And next, we'll be hearing from George Michael. He's a senior specialist at the UK-based firm Agua Consult. He has over 8 years of experience working on urban sanitation in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as South and Southeast Asia. And he also currently serves on the board of Soil, a container-based sanitation service provider in Haiti. So without further ado, if George would like to come up, thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. There's a lot of buttons here. The big green one. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So we heard today Wanza's presentation from the utilities perspective and how the utilities is engaging with the private sector. Today I'm going to try to answer a question that a lot of people have asked me, or you might have asked other people. Why are so many millions going into these innovative sanitation service providers when they're really still small and they're not really at scale? And I think that's part of the challenge, is that engaging with government. And so this is based on a very quick evaluation I did with Agua Consult, our team at Agua Consult with Gufran and Delia, looking at Grand Challenges Canadian Foundation, looking at their portfolio of sanitation businesses that they've invested in. So about 15% of Grand Challenges Canada's GCC's portfolio is focused on sanitation. Mainly it's a public health foundation focused on investing in public health ventures. These are some of the 8 ventures that they've already invested in, and they've already finished their investments in some of them, like Soil and Samagra. And Laguna Water, those have ended, and the other active ones are with Clean Team, X-Runner, Sanitation, Luwat, and OAV, Water and Life in Bangladesh. Just to quickly describe where they've invested along the sanitation chain. So most of their investments have been in, I can look here. Most of their investments have been on container-based sanitation. And on waste to resource, they've invested in soil and sanitation, and waste to compost and waste to fuel briquettes, biomass briquettes. They've also invested in access to sanitation facilities. That's OAV in Samagra in India, and Water and Life in Bangladesh. The models that I think you all, I hope, are aware of the CBS models and waste to resource models, but just to quickly explain what we're calling these access to sanitation facility models. They're essentially pay-per-use public toilets, subscription community toilets where you live within a community and you're just sharing, a few households are sharing a toilet, and a lease model for individual toilets where a toilet is constructed and they pay a monthly lease model, a monthly lease on their water bills. And that's with OEV. So in 2014, Deloitte had published a report with a framework of understanding with the challenges of how ventures scale or get to scale and the challenges of getting to scale. It looked at 4 elements. The first 2 elements was looking at the firm itself, how strong the business is, how strong the business model is, the leadership, the management within that team that all impacts their ability to scale, the value proposition they offer to customers. Also looking at the value chain, so the other business that they interact with. If you're a container-based sanitation business, you rely quite a bit on tuk-tuks or trucks, and when your tractor fails, you can't wait 3 weeks for someone to come and fix it. So what is the value chain around it? And it's typically, this is where the type of foundations, these like Grand Challenges Canada, this is typically in at least these 2 where they invest. This is where they put most of their money in. But these are also critical to scale these other 2 elements, which is public goods, having the right infrastructure, road, power, treatment facilities. Do you have an understanding of the market? If there's a utility in place, do they really understand where their customers are? Do they understand who they are and how much they can afford? And then obviously the enabling environment, the legal environment about regulation, policy, any national or local citywide strategies that exist, taxes or subsidies that the government could offer. But before we move any further on government engagement, I just want to be clear about who I'm referring to when we say government. It's sanitation authorities, so that's it's creepy ghost coming out the other door. That's the other session I can see, sorry. So it's utilities, sanitation utilities, water utilities, municipalities, and regulators, and sometimes also asset holders. So I'm just going to use the word government or sanitation authorities to refer to those. So the ventures that Grand Challenges Canada has invested in, they already have existing relationships with their sanitation authorities. And there's 5 relationships that I'm going to focus on today. So the first 3 are around access to land, permission to operate, so getting a license from an environmental agency or the local authority, and permission to dispose of waste at a dumping site. In most of these cases, it's typically an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that these ventures have with their sanitation authority counterparts. And there are risks with this, and I'm going to talk about the risks both to the venture itself and general public and the sanitation authority. In terms of access to land, if you construct a toilet or a treatment facility and all you have is an MOU to use that land, that's quite a significant investment that you're putting into that piece of land that you can't take away with you. But they're forced to do that because there are no easy ways to get a 10, 20-year lease on a piece of land. So they have to move forward with MOUs, with a 3-year, 4-year MOUs to have access to affordable land, especially in urban areas. For licenses, a lot of as I mentioned, a lot of the licenses that they have are typically waste management licenses, especially the container-based sanitation business. You have a license to move around waste. But a lot of these licenses have no legally enforceable, well, they are legally enforceable, but there are no service level agreements, there's no oversight or very weak oversight by the environmental agencies that offer them. And then permission to dispose. Some of the ventures they have legal authority to dispose or an MOU to dispose at the treatment sites, but then the sanitation authorities don't have the capacity to provide the treatment themselves. And that's a challenge and that's a risk for both the venture and the local government or sanitation authority. The last 2 that I'm going to be focused on for the rest of this presentation is around recurring around subsidies, essentially, and public finance. Ventures are seeking some kind of support, and I think we all, if you don't agree, let us know in the questions, but generally I think we can all agree that rich people have been getting subsidies for sanitation and the poor have not, and they're expected to pay for the full sanitation chain. And there's now an understanding that that's not how it works. There needs to be some kind of subsidy that allows for a fully safely managed sanitation across the whole chain. And so these ventures are looking for these type of subsidies, and sometimes it's in-kind subsidies. So when they are dumping at a treatment site, while a vacuum tanker might pay a dumping fee, some of these ventures are not. So that is some kind of in-kind subsidy. The challenge there is that's great, you're offering free disposal for lower income households, but the other side of that is the sanitation authority is not able to cover the full cost of treatment. And then some ventures are looking at demand creation and engaging with sanitation authorities on creating demand for their services. And that's still relatively untested. Don't know the effectiveness of public health officers and whether they're able to engage with sanitation authorities, engage with customers and get them to buy into a service. So what are the relationships that some of these ventures are seeking and that they feel and we feel are necessary for scale? I'm going to talk about 4 of those. So the first one is, legitimacy, so around regulation and policy. And there have been already some efforts, places like Kenya, on strengthening policy that would allow for some of these ventures to operate, but the overall environment is still not very conducive to innovative sanitation services, even when, in most cases, they are safer than the traditional existing services. When you look at pit latrines and manual emptying and sewers and treatment facilities that aren't operating, you look at these ventures, and if there is a side-by-side comparison, they're often much more inclusive, more affordable, safer, and more environmentally friendly. They are looking for contracts, legally binding contracts, whatever those are, whether they're service contracts, O&M, BOT contracts. The challenge there is it's very complex. Procurement processes with utilities and sanitation authorities are quite complex. It's not easy to get those to happen quickly. And again, the last thing I'm going to focus on is public finance, whether recurring finance or, whether it's national or in-kind or financial. Some are looking for tax exemptions. They're paying 17% VAT, and they'd be able to recover much more of their cost if there was some kind of exemptions for service provider that are targeting low-income customers. But it's a very complicated legal process. In some cases, you have to go to the National Assembly to get approval for a tiny venture to get VAT exemption. If you're looking at Brexit, you can't get Parliament to do anything most of the time. And then recurring financial subsidies, they are looking at how they can use public finance to cover the cost. So covering the cost, so they might charge customers $5 and they might ask for the public sector to cover the other $5. The challenge there is about availability and prioritization of those funds. And I'm going to talk about that here a bit more, but around the role of public finance. So what we found was very interesting is the level of public finance needed in the different countries is very different. And it's quite a complex thing. So we're looking at some of the ventures. On my tiptoes, there we go. So you look at, this graph in the horizontal is what the venture charges. It's looking at dollars per customer, per person per day. And if you look at, 5 cents is what Bill and Melinda Gates suggests for some of the reinvented toilet technologies, 5 cents per $1, 1 minute. 5 cents per 5 cents per person per day. And then at the vertical, which you can't see because formatting has shifted, it's what the competitor services are charging. So if I was a CBS provider, in some cities, the competitors are pit latrines and emptying a pit latrine. So you can see in places like Peru, the venture is charging significantly more than what the competitors can provide, and the same in Bangladesh. You look at Ghana, they're charging significantly less than what the competitors are charging. So this is around willingness to pay. If I can get something much cheaper somewhere else, why wouldn't I go there? But then you combine that with ability to pay. And what we've done is we've compared the service fees to GDP per capita. And just to say that is not a perfect metric, because actually customers, the target customers have much lower incomes than the average GDP for a country. So we look at a place like Haiti. If you look at the first graph on the, what is this now, my left hand? Haiti is charging less than what their competitors are charging, but they're charging nearly 5% of a household, of a person's average income. So it's impossible for them to increase that fee because people will revert to competitors. And these are the market failures that public finance is there to correct. These are the things that we need to rebalance, and that's where government can play a role. The other thing, I think I'm over time, to focus on is what role can IFIs play in scaling sanitation. I think, especially when it comes to public finance, I think there is potentially a role for them to play, even in subsidies and not just in construction contracts. And so in Haiti, there are discussions between an IFI and a CBS business to try to get public finance. So the IFI would finance government that would then be able to cover the cost. The biggest challenge there is that in most places, there isn't any public finance available for sanitation. So we talked about availability and priority. So we looked at Ghana, Bangladesh, Haiti, and Madagascar. We tried to grade the availability of public finance, and most of them, there are no mechanisms in place to cover the cost of services, either capital or service costs. In some places like Peru, there are, but they're not prioritizing them. So that's part of the challenge, and that might be a gap that IFIs can work on and invest in. So just to finalize, way forward is, from GCC's perspective, they need to develop a better understanding of what is the government's perspective on engaging with the private sector, and that's why we found it very interesting to have this session with the utility. The questions that they need to be asking is, what are the expectations of sanitation authorities of these innovative sanitation providers, these ventures, and what are the risks that sanitation authorities take when they do engage with ventures? And looking a bit more specifically, and those are kind of the general bits, but lastly, more specifically, is these complicated procurement rules that typically more traditional service providers can engage with, but these more innovative service providers find it challenging to engage with government on. Thank you very much.
So thank you. So now we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. So if anyone has a question for either of our presenters, we have a microphone. Now.
Hi, yeah. Thanks for presentations. Just a quick question on the slide that Mr. Michael showed on the kind of comparisons between venture fees and the other fees that competitors are charging in the market. Any thoughts on why there's such a divergence? Because are these fees capped by local governments? Are they capped by grant-making organizations? Because it's interesting, especially in places like Haiti or in Peru, that you're seeing such a multiplier between the two kinds of organizations in the market.
It's not, just to be clear, they're not exactly so if it's a CBS business, it's not another CBS business. So it might be comparing CBS to pit emptying. So they're completely different, and we annualize it, and we're comparing. In Bangladesh, for instance, NGOs construct a lot of nearly free facilities, and it requires very small contribution, whereas they're recovering, the venture that is in Bangladesh is recovering much more of that capital cost. So it's just dynamics of the market. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, I would like to know what is the concept, your vision to handle this enforcement aspect of local government enforcement of the Public Health Act.
Enforcement of?
Of the Public Health Act. Yeah, I would say.
think I earlier mentioned to the fact that I think Lusaka is actually at a very exciting time because I think in a while we have seen all the relevant stakeholders really working towards achieving one goal. What we have seen is, I think, from the Lusaka Sanitation project with support of many other partners, we have seen a situation where right now we have the local authority developing a bylaw. That bylaw is specifically focused on on-site sanitation and FSM. And so we have a Public Health Act that's already existing, but then in terms of enforcement, this is in a process of preparing a bylaw that then should enable the authority to actually enforce based on this bylaw that will be developed. Because previously, we were not able to actually, we had a Public Health Act, but we were not able to enforce. First of all, we don't have standards for construction of facilities, and then there's a gray area on what we would call FSM and emptying, and as much as we are developing this as a utility, we also have other stakeholders that contribute to the provision of the service, also moving at the same time as us.
Yeah. Other questions for either of our presenters?
No questions? Good.
Quiet audience after lunch. All right, well, let's give them another round of applause. Okay, and so we've just heard these two presentations that looked at both the public sector side and a bit on the private sector side, particularly on the small scale private sector. And now we're going to have a panel where we will be hearing from another utility, a service provider, a private sector service provider, an entity that works at the intersection of those two and helps facilitate some of these PPP arrangements, as well as a regulator. So if I could have all four of our panelists come up. You can sit in whatever chairs you would like. All right, so with us today, we, in order, let's see what order you've sat in. We have Margaret Mena, who comes to us from Kenya, where she is the managing director of the Limuru Water and Sewerage Company, which is one of the water and sewerage service providers in Kenya. She's also chairperson of the Women in Water and Sanitation Association, or WIWAS, in Kenya. And her background is in water chemistry, but she also has a master's in public health and a major in public health and epidemiology. And next in line here, we have Kasenga Hara, who is the senior inspector at the National Water Supply and Sanitation Council, which is the economic regulator for the water and sanitation sector in Zambia. And next we have Nick Alcott, who's from South Africa here. And he's a professional civil engineer with a master's in urban infrastructure design and management, who's been working in the sector for the past 20 years. He's a managing member of the Kanyisa Projects, a developmental organization based in eThekwini Municipality, or Durban, here in South Africa, which focuses on water, sanitation, biogas, and other solutions for cities. And last but not least, we have Dixon Ochieng. He's also in Kenya and is responsible for government relations for Sanitation, which is another container-based sanitation service provider. He previously started and ran his own IT consulting company and also has a degree in community development and social work. So first, could we give a round of applause to our great mix of panelists? So I'm going to... Is this working again? Maybe? Perfect. Okay, I'm going to join you again. And I'm going to start by asking each of you one or two questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience for more questions, and I expect the audience to have more questions. You'll have time to think while they start speaking and sharing with us. And so I'm going to do this in a slightly strategic order, the order that I explained when I was explaining the panel. So we're going to start with our service provider, our public sector service provider. And I was wondering if you could share with us briefly first what your experiences have been around in the sanitation sector, specifically doing PPPs for service provision, for operation and maintenance, whatever dimensions it might be, and what, in particular, what some of the challenges have been for you in entering into that space.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. I'm Margaret Maina. As he mentioned, I'm Managing Director for the Water and Sewerage Company. This is one of the water service providers in Kenya, and our mandate is water and services provision in our country. One of the major barriers that we have found is the engagement with the private sector is there are no rules and regulation for collaboration efforts, especially in the sanitation areas. In matters of sanitation, we deal more on the structured sewerage systems, and the majority of the works of the unserved areas is done by the private entities. So the relationship we have is about the licensing and also the giving the permits for dumping from the entities. And I'm hoping that we are going to create laws and the regulations of the engagement. And one of the issues is that we have been lacking data between the water service providers and the MTS. There is no data exchange that translates to the coverage even in the unserved areas.
Thank you. And so that's our public sector service provider. Could we now hear from our private sector service provider? And so, Dixon, your role is specifically around the government engagement, and I'm curious first, at what levels do you engage with the government, and why have you taken the approach that you've taken? And similarly, what is currently the greatest risk you're facing in your engagements in creating these sort of PPP arrangements?
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. Thank you. To your question about the level of engagement, the way the Kenyan government is set up is a two-tier government, where you have the national government and you have the county government. We are operating at the county and the sub-county government, which is a child of the county. And one thing that we've done over years is realization that building network across both national and the county government is very key, because the county government is a devolved government, and the water and sanitation in Kenya is a devolved function, but it's also a constitutional right that the national government has a lot of interest in, so they can't devolve it 100%. So we've done a good job in building our relationship at the county level in terms of how we engage with the WSPs and how we influence the regulation and policy framework at the county level. But also, if you look at the national level, you have a government that, the national government, which is formulates the national policy to regulate water and sanitation. You have a national government which is an advisor, and also a national government which is a funder. So all the funding streams, all the funding from the county government come from the national government. So it's very important not to try to focus on just one relationship, but I think it's, what has helped us is building strong group of advocates at the county level, and also replicating that at the national level, so that we align our efforts at the national and at the county level as well. And in terms of your question, in terms of the challenging thing that we're facing right now, you look at the enabling environment. We are lucky that where we're operating in Nakuru County is a very progressive county, where the county government has been very embracive and engaging private sector, and with that we've built a love relationship that has made us to prosper. I look at public-private partnership as basically plain saying the love relationship. If the private sector cannot fall in love with the public sector, there's nothing that's going to happen, because you need to fall in love with someone to understand someone. So we've done that very well in Nakuru, and our partners, Nakuru County, even they followed us. They wanted to know where we are going, and they're here with us. So, but you look, that kind of enabling environment doesn't cut across all the 47 counties. So if we look at another county that we want to expand the expansion, maybe it's the progress level is not as the way it is in Nakuru. So that is one of the challenges that might slow our progress as we look into scaling up operations.
Great. And so those two lead nicely into my questions for Nick. So Nick's work has been at this intersection and in helping arrange these sorts of public-private partnerships, from what I understand, often working with the utility to help them engage with the private sector. So we've just heard from Dixon about these beautiful love stories of PPPs. And so my question is, why don't we see more of them? Why are we not seeing, I think those in the room are clearly, I suspect, in the belief that PPPs can be a positive influence within the sector and have an important role to play. So why aren't more public and private entities falling in love?
Yeah, well, in South Africa, there's a sort of fear of privatization that kind of brings loss of jobs. So in this country, it's quite a difficult political kind of area. So I guess municipalities are very wary of it. So, you've got to go about it in a strategic kind of way. And certainly I think the municipality is seeing the advantages. The opportunities are there because the municipality they can't manage on their own. Especially if you're dealing with the amount of fecal waste that's coming out of pit toilets, they've tried before to put that into their treatment works and it causes failure. So they realize they can't do it, they suddenly can't capacitate themselves, and so they've got to come up with ways of dealing with it. And fortunately in South Africa there's a reasonably strong regulatory environment that's there. So, but even when it's there, it's quite hard to also convince city management to sort of change your processes and look at these partnerships. They would prefer to go a standard tender route on the particular project that we worked on. They wanted to, they broke up the work into two kind of contracts. No, it's not working too well. Hello? Still not there?
Turn on the other mic.
Hello? Still not there. It's working? Okay. Still not working. Should I just swap the thing? Nothing.
Speak loudly.
Okay.
Well, actually, the translators can't hear. So he has a new.
So in that, still not. Hello? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Still not great. Okay, I'll try and talk loudly. In that particular case, along the value chain, there was the emptying and transport, and then there was processing. And so the city decided to break the work up into two kinds of public-private partnerships. One was a standard tender contract, and they wanted to give it to one managing contractor. And when they advertised that tender, they had 60, 70 people saying, please break up the work. We all want work, all the small businesses. So there you had the municipality wanting to have one contractor and many smaller businesses coming in and saying we wanted work. So the city was still risk averse because they said we need to have compliance, we need to have, deal with health issues, environmental issues. And they managed to convince the private businesses to go with that one contractor, but a lot of small businesses were contracted at a local level, and then gradually they were trained up, and the new tenders that are going out, a lot is going to be broken down. There we have some sound. The new tenders that are going out soon are now, they're going to be opportunities for some of those small businesses that have come up, and the work is going to be broken down. So it was kind of a step-by-step process, trying to balance the needs of what the municipality were nervous of, the risks that were out there, with the desperate need for small businesses to get involved in the sector. So that was kind of how we handled it, with a step-by-step process. Maybe I should stop there for now.
Oh, Our last panelist comes to us from a regulator, and I think that's great. We've been hearing from all three of the others about the importance of the enabling environment being well situated for these public-private partnerships to exist. And I think in general, public-private partnerships can be very complicated and difficult to regulate, but even more so in some of these examples where we're talking about really small-scale providers. And so we heard a bit about the case of Lusaka in Zambia, and I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit more about the Lusaka experience, but from the side of the regulator in this transition to developing policy to regulate the private sector.
Sure.
Just try again, I think.
So first of all, let me mention that the law in Zambia that guides the water sector, that's the Water Supply and Sanitation Act, number 28 of 1997, actually does provide for private sector participation. That can come in various ways. It could be a service contract, delegated mandate, or up to as high as a concession. It further says provided that the private enterprise has minority shareholding, so they can have shareholding in the water companies as well, up to 49% at least. That said, the mandate solely belongs to the utilities that exist now, the licensed utilities, to provide water and sanitation services. In the past, we focused so much on sewerage services, both from a regulatory point of view as well as from the service provider's point of view. So we left this empty space for on-site sanitation. Now there's that movement, what you heard about from the Lusaka sanitation program, to move into this space that has remained unregulated from the service point of view and also from the economic point of view. And this is where we're moving in. So as a nation, we have formulated, you've heard this so many times, the regulatory frameworks for on-site sanitation, and that is being backed up by a bylaw. So the bylaw clarifies the role each and every player should play in this business. So it's entirely up to the service provider. In this case, when you talk about Lusaka, we're talking about Lusaka Water and Sewerage Company, to bring on board the private enterprise along the service chain. So there are various aspects where they can actually be involved. The law is there. If it's a higher level of PPP, we have a PPP unit as an arm of the government that will also regulate or provide oversight on some of these agreements. But in a nutshell, yes, there's a lot of scope, there's a lot of opportunity for the private sector. There are quite a number of examples that we can cite on the water side, in the Zambian water sector, where there's private sector participation. To a higher level, as high as a delegated contract. This happened some time back on the Copper Belt, one of the biggest provinces in the country, where a company was actually providing water and sanitation services. We didn't go ahead with that particular contract, but what I can say is that there's enough scope and enough legal provision, as well as an enabling environment. The onus, obviously, is that the private sector must see an incentive in coming to the business, and that is what we need to create. Thank you.
Great, thank you all. So now we'll open it up to audience questions to any of the panel members. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, it'd be great if you could say their name or a description of the entity they work for. Can you help with the microphone? I see hands. And we'll pass this one. That's needed.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I have two questions, one for more of the private sector. And if you could talk a little about the transparency of the procurement processes when the tenders came out and what you felt, maybe even rate the government transparency and how they handled the procurement process, what's something that you appreciated that they did, and something if they were to do it again. And I know, Nick, you mentioned kind of the tenders, starting with the one tender and then as capacity was built, breaking out to multiple tenders. But on that private side, what's really helped from the government transparency? And then a question for the government representative, what were some of the difficulties that you've had in monitoring these PPPs or SLAs?
Do you want to start?
Yeah. I think I'll take the question for difficulties on PPPs. And I'll want to say that in Kenya, we have a PPP framework at the national level that which is enshrined in the Constitution through the PPP Act. But you look at the PPP Act, there's no clear definition on PPP for sanitation or small utilities or between utility and the private sector. So I think the work in progress right now that is going on with the different actors and players in Kenya is how can we have a clear PPP framework that can enable social enterprises providing sanitation or water services to easily engage with the utilities and the government at the county level or maybe at the national level. So the arrangement that we have right now with our public lovers, the county government of Nakuru, is a MOU that we signed in 2017 that clearly stipulates the key objectives we want to achieve together, the level of engagement, and the contribution from both sides. I think when I say about the challenge being the enabling environment, that is an area that we are looking to work together in building it, and I was happy to see it mentioned as one of the areas lagging behind in the Ngor commitment. So I'll encourage all the players who can team with us in Nakuru to start showcasing or engaging the government in creating a PP framework that can enable this good work to continue.
Great. Are you going to take the question on M&A?
Procurement.
Yes, and monitoring these contracts.
Okay. What you have said, I just want to make clear that the PPT Act, which came into place in 2015, has not been applied in the water service providers, so it is still a national government affair. On procurement issues, we have a Procurement Act, which also guides our procurement process, and sometimes it is not very friendly. So we need an enabling environment because it is a process, and which brings a lot of bureaucracy where the private sector is not used to. So that has been a major barrier, and also laws according to sanitation, legal framework on how to deal with the sanitation issues has not been done in our country, and I think this is the time we are going to do the policies that are going to guide on how we are going to work together with the private sector. On MTS, in our country, they are licensed by three entities: NEMA, that is National Environmental Management Authority. They're also licensed by the local authorities, and then the water service providers for dumping. But then the problem of oversighting, regulation, quality standard setting, that is a framework that we are going to work on. I think that is what we are taking home from this conference.
Can I make just a comment on the monitoring and evaluation? Just a couple of things that really help to make implementation by those small businesses, well monitored and evaluated. One was really good GIS data, so knowing where your 80,000 toilets are exactly, so you can break up that work and monitor it and issue it and check it, and also having contact details of every customer so you can follow up telephonically, and also involving the community in the monitoring. So we had what's called a community liaison officer, who's a representative of that area, who signed off on every sort of emptying that had happened, verifying that it was done, because obviously these were done sort of systematically through a community. So, and the homeowner obviously would be involved in that. So having some of those checks and balances really helps you in your monitoring processes. Those are just practical things that I think help.
Great. Next question.
Je vais m'exprimer en français. Je ne sais pas si quelqu'un pourrait traduire après pour les panélistes. Ma question pourrait être une question transversale qui pourrait être adressée aussi bien aux gouvernements locaux qu'aux organismes intermédiaires qu'aux entreprises privées. C'est par exemple la question du foncier pour la réalisation de toilettes publiques dont la gestion est privée. Et tout à l'heure, il est apparu qu'il est important dans la négociation foncière d'avoir des contrats à long terme qui permettent donc de garantir la rentabilité des business. Et dans le cadre de cette négociation pour la disponibilité du foncier, avec qui il faut négocier? Est-ce qu'il faut négocier avec les organismes intermédiaires ou bien il faut négocier directement avec les délégataires de services qui sont les privés? Ça, c'est une première question. La deuxième question, c'est aujourd'hui, quand il y a délégation de services, est-ce qu'il y a des redevances que les gouvernements locaux, notamment les municipalités, attendraient donc des privés qui exploitent ces toilettes publiques? Et je vous remercie.
So the first question is about public toilets, and specifically about getting land for public toilets that are potentially privately operated, and how to sort of negotiate those spaces. So it's a question to all sides, right? And the second question, from what I understood, is about the benefits that would come to a public sector provider by engaging a private sector service provider.
Come again on the second question. The second question, come again.
The second question again? From what I understand, what benefit, so maybe another way would be, what benefits would the public sector see in contracting out service provision for sanitation? So we're not talking about construction or treatment? Oh, what's the benefit to the...
Or in English, do municipalities expect a fee to be paid by the businesses afterwards?
Yes. So either question to all of you.
Right. I wanted to make a comment about the earlier question on the observation on PPPs regarding enforcement. And I gave an example of a management contract to this big utility that was actually licensed as a sole utility, I mentioned on the Copper Belt. So in terms of regulation and compliance to the various regulations, that particular utility did actually manage to comply very well because we're directly regulating it as a regulator. And this is a lesson when you're doing delegated mandates, that regulation in that particular case then will have to go through the license provider. So if we're talking about Lusaka Water engaging a private sector, then our regulation will have to go through Lusaka Water to the private enterprise, and we're not regulating the private enterprise directly. So that might have challenges as far as compliance is concerned, and you really have to be careful as a regulator, even as a service provider, as you put in all that regulatory blanket. Now, coming to the question of land acquisition for public facilities, that really depends on the country regulations. In our country, all land belongs to the state and is held on behalf of the state by the president. So the president, if you have a challenge, can actually acquire land on behalf of the utility or for public services. So that makes it a little bit easy. If you're challenged, you can go through that avenue. Otherwise, the utilities on themselves as well can acquire land through the Ministry of Lands, and they can put up whatever infrastructure they feel like. The second question, I'm not quite clear about the question, but it really depends on the model that you come up with. Yes, if you can get a private sector as a utility, obviously it has to be a negotiated contract. Who pays what, who pays for what service, and who pays maybe a maintenance or management fee. Those aspects need to be negotiated quite well, but yes, there are those things to consider.
Okay. From our perspective in Kenya, what happens is that if we are doing public toilets, they must be done on public land, which is given by the national government or the county government. And the public land can also be found in the schools, in the public places like bus stops, where you can do the toilets. So that is usually available through the local government or the national government. In some cases, there are some private providers who have entered into MOU with Nairobi or Kiambu County, where they have done toilets and then they enter into an MOU on the payback period of maybe operate for 7 years, and then after that you hand it back to the government. So it is a model which has worked in Nairobi and also in part of Kiambu County, so it is available. About the benefits of working together, especially with the private MTS, in most of the areas, like I've been saying, we are working together with the private MTS to serve our area, and they are doing the on-site sanitation where we are not able to cover as utilities. And what has been lacking is the interaction between data collection, how many people have you served, and I would wish if the MTS also would have a data center where they can say this year we transported so much and evacuated to my WSP. The volumes that they evacuated and which we treated and the population covered, so that data is also translates into our national coverage, because right now there is a vacuum. The only data which is captured by the regulator is about what the utilities have actually treated, but they don't take care of the imported waste from other counties. And also, the other benefit of working together is to look at the barriers that are inhibiting this process of bringing in the PPPs. In that, like in Nairobi, in some areas, some MTS will have to cross 2 counties, and when they are crossing each county for transport, they are also charged as if they are doing some other businesses. So it is, if people are collaborating and working together, we can create a framework where there's no double taxation, and we serve because it is within the mandate of the county governments also to provide sanitation to the population. Thank you.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think just to add something and to back up my colleague from Kenya is land in Kenya is publicly owned by the government, and the county government is also asset owner through the utility. So for the case of our partnership arrangement with the county government of Nakuru, one of the in-kind giving was land. So we've actually built our waste processing plant into county's land, which is next to the county's waste treatment plant. And that is the arrangement that we look at duplicating in other counties as we expand.
Just to add an extra comment on benefits to the municipality of linking up with private sector. The other, I mentioned we had the sort of emptying contracts in place with small businesses, and we also had to set up a service level agreement with an operator. And really that technology that operator is using is quite new, it's innovative, it's complex, and it's not something that the municipality really has the capacity or the know-how to really engage with. And there's just, it's an ideal partnership where they can work with someone who really, that's their core business. And that's, the advantages for both sides there.
Next question.
Thank you. I'm Titus Safari from Mayura, Tanzania. We generally, a PPP arrangement has to be considered as a means to an end, and not a solution to a particular problem. And when we are talking about PPP in provision of sanitation services, we should look at it in terms of whether it will guarantee effectiveness in service provision, efficiency and sustainability of the services. I think to me those are very important issues to consider. Now I will request the panelists to share with us their experiences with the PPP implementation in their respective countries in terms of efficiency, effectiveness and sustainability of PPP in provision of particularly on-site sanitation services. Thank you.
Who would like to start?
Okay, I'll just do a quick start. Our particular project was taking what's quite a dry fecal waste from urine diversion toilets, and the options available to the municipality was taking to a hazardous waste site at quite at a certain cost. So there's transport costs, and then there's payment at that hazardous waste site. The other option, which the municipality doesn't really want to pursue in the long term, is burial on site if there's space. And so one needs to do an analysis and say, okay, if you're going to have this PPP with an operator using a new technology, part of that whole project was assessing the business viability for the private operator, but also is it going to save the municipality money? And that's what we're looking at. And once that rolls out at scale, it's only going to work for the city if it's going to save it money. If it's going to cost more, well, there's no point. So I agree with you. You have to look at those cost benefit and say, is it being more efficient? And so the business model that's been set up is around, if there's profit generated, then that will bring down the cost to the municipality. So they will get their profit share through. So that's how it's set up, and agreed, you've got to work like that. Otherwise, what's the point of going with a public-private partnership?
I think for our cases, you look at utility in terms of its mandate. The utilities in Kenya are owned by the county government, but they privately operate. And the key mandates they're supposed to provide is water, sewerage, and on-site sanitation. So in reality, they have done a good job in trying to meet the water and sewerage connectivity. But you see there's a gap on the on-site sanitation. And there's a number of reasons. If you add on-site sanitation to their mandates or to their responsibilities, they are going to have more challenges in terms of meeting the two. So as a private sector, we look at ourselves coming into fit into the third mandate of the utility, of working with them to meet their on-site sanitation goals. And by doing that, we can make sure now even their sewerage plants, like for our partner in Naivasha, which is already operating over capacity from the designed, from the original design, can now be freed and intake more sewerage connection, and all the on-site sanitation from the vacuum trucks can be diverted into a treatment plant. In terms of sustainability, a model as the reuse end, where we also generate private revenues from selling the byproducts that we generate from treating the fecal sludge and transforming it to biofuel. So another benefit that the utility get from the partnership is also a revenue stream, additional revenue stream, and also we are coming in with a team of experts that can bring in more expertise on the on-site in terms of service delivery, and also we can come together and do joint application for funding to help them meet their on-site sanitation goals.
So for the case of Zambia, I already mentioned the PPP initiatives that have taken place have mostly been on the water and the sewerage side. I also mentioned that until recently, we're just beginning to move into this space, putting all the regulatory requirements, the guidelines, the tools, as well as the bylaws. So that is all in the process. I should emphasize that the mandate still belongs to the existing utilities, solely to provide water sanitation services. But then they have options according to the law. So they need to analyze this very well, and there's so many factors that can motivate them into engaging the private sector. Either capacity is lacking within the utility, or either there's a huge capital requirement that the utility might not meet at that point in time. So the mathematics and all the economics essentially will be done by the utilities. As a regulator, we need to do scrutinize and authorize to say, yes, we think this is viable. This safeguards both the consumer who has to be safe, but also the interest of the company. That is all we look into as a regulator. In this moment, we're just venturing into this, so we don't have quite concrete examples that we can give. Hopefully next time we come here, we should be able to point to one or two areas of engagement. Thank you.
I think in Kenya, the PPPs are adding value to where the WSPs, we do our treatment and that is it. What do we do with our sludge? They are coming in now to complete the sanitation chain, because they are using now that sludge that we have already created in our wastewater systems. They are using it to make briquettes. They are also using it to make fertilizer. So that is an area they are bringing in the innovation, and they are also creating value and also completing the process. So it is an important venture, because the water utilities will just to end at treatment and disposal. After that, they are taking over what we are supposed to be disposing of and working on it and turning it into money and also employment. So it is a great innovation in completing the cycle. So it is, we really encourage what they are doing. They are also piloting in other water utilities. because when I have the sledger, I can't give the people to use. They don't even trust it when we give it as the utility. So we just dump it. It is just creating mountains and mountains of waste. So they are using an alternative method of our waste management, which is also adding value and also creating a clean environment. So the public sector may not afford that, but the private sector has the innovation, they have the capacity, and also they have the finances that can be used into that, and also in the process also make money, and which also translates to a clean environment. So we all have a role to play. We just need to put the framework right, the regulation part, we need to make it clear so that at least we know our money is in here and it starts here.
Thank you. So I believe we're almost up on time. So if everyone could join me in thanking our great panelists. Thank you all again. Sorry, just to wrap up really briefly, again, thank you all for attending. I think we heard some very interesting things today about PPPs and sanitation, the importance of the enabling environment, the different innovative approaches we can take. Innovation in the sector is not just about technology, but all these new models and new ways of thinking about PPPs and really unpacking what that means. And it seems like there's interest from both sides in encouraging more public-private partnerships to fill in gaps and to innovate in new ways and to ensure we're providing high-quality services to all of our customers. So thank you all again for attending.